Hello, everyone. This is Chris Hines, serving on Denver City Council, representing District 10. Thank you for attending tonight's virtual town hall regarding auxiliary dwelling units citywide. We're going to give a few minutes for people to trickle in from the waiting room and to join. We should get underway no later than about 5 after. So thank you for coming, and hang on just a sec so that we can get everyone in from the waiting room. Hello, everyone. This is Chris Hines. I'm just wanted to give you another quick update. We have about 115 people registered, and for this meeting tonight, we're going to give people just another minute or two to percolate in from the waiting room, and we'll get underway here in no more than 2 minutes. Thank you for coming. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining tonight. I'm Chris Hines. I serve on Denver City Council representing District 10. Hopefully you're tuning in to the Citywide ADU virtual town hall. If you are looking for the ADU virtual town hall, you found it. And I want to thank you so much for signing up and participating in this community discussion. So we have 3 council members here. I will have everyone introduce themselves here in a second, but I do want to just say that we do have the sponsors of this proposed legislation here tonight to participate, listen, hear your thoughts, concerns, your compliments. Hopefully, we have compliments too. And so, how about we start with the council members. Perhaps the 2 other sponsors can give a couple opening remarks and introduce yourselves. All right, Councilmember Parody.
All right, I was looking at Watson, but he let me go first. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Parody. I'm one of your 2 council members at large. So if you live in Denver, and I hope if you're coming to this town hall, you live in Denver. Otherwise, you must be really into ADUs. I am your council member, or one of them. I am excited to have been able to be a part of this. A lot of work has been done in the city over the years to make sure that all of our regulations surrounding ADUs, that we've put a ton of work into those and gotten them right. And then the final step here is to actually make them possible without a zoning change in the neighborhoods where they have not been possible to date. So you'll hear a lot more about that from our planners, but thank you for caring and taking the time to show up. And again, I represent you, so feel free to email me about this or anything else.
Thank you, Councilmember Hines and Councilmember Parity. My name is Darrell Watson. I'm the City Council member on the East Side. I represent the fine District 9. And I just want to say it is exciting to hear we have over 100 folks on a town hall discussion virtually at 6 o'clock on a Thursday night. So there's lots of interest in this. And I can tell you, I know that as a former city council, neighborhood R&O president and someone who was engaged in my neighborhood long before I ran for office, the discussion around accessory dwelling units have always been about whether we have a process that allows everyone that wanted the opportunity to build one to have that access and ability to do it. So I'm excited that we believe, as sponsors of this process, that that you're going to be hearing about and being able to engage with us on provides that ease of access. It allows for members to have a process without going through that rigorous zoning step that takes many, many years and sometimes takes expertise that individual homeowners do not have. So thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you, Council Members Parity and Watson. I think that we've got something really good to show you, but really what matters tonight is what you think. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to the conversation. We will certainly have, we'll have a presentation. We'll certainly have a lot of time for questions and answers. We do have just a little bit about Zoom webinars. We do have a Q&A function. And we will be checking the Q&A. It looks like we already have 2 questions in the Q&A. So thank you for finding that and for using it. If you wish to use the Q&A, that's fine. We also have a chat function that doesn't go to everyone, but it does go to the panelists. So if you have a comment that doesn't fit under the Q&A section, feel free to send that using the chat, and all the panelists will get it. And without any further ado, let's hear from our fine folks in the community planning and development.
Thank you, Councilman Hines. My name is Justin Montgomery. I'm a senior city planner with CPD, and I'll be giving this presentation. The purpose of the virtual town hall is to provide information about the proposed citywide ADUs project and answer questions.
And I'm Abe Barge with Community Planning and Development. I work with Justin, and I'll be working in the background to help answer questions. Please feel free to put your questions into the question and answer. We'll answer a lot of them as we go through, just in text, so feel free to put them in there. And then we'll be saving up some questions to ask Justin and the council members who are sponsoring this amendment live after the presentation. And I guess that just leaves Jenna, perhaps?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenna Morton. I'm a marketing communication specialist with Community Planning and Development. So I'm also here on the back end to help answer some of your questions. We're very excited that you came to this town hall this evening.
All right, well, let's get going. The presentation tonight will cover 4 main topics: why ADUs, the current ADU zoning standards, our citywide ADUs proposal, and then the next steps for this process. So firstly, what are accessory dwelling units? What are we talking about? So accessory dwelling units are self-contained small living spaces that are extensions of an existing property. They're often called mother-in-law suites, granny flats, casitas, backyard cottages, garage apartments, or basement apartments. The image here shows the 3 varieties of ADUs. You can have an internal ADU, an ADU addition, or a detached ADU. So why ADUs? ADUs can add a variety to the city's housing stock and options for property owners. There are several success stories from homeowners in Denver. Denverites are using ADUs to age in place, house family, or to provide extra source of income. The West Denver Single Family Plus ADU pilot program has lots of these stories featured on their website, including the story of Jose and his daughter Lorena, who built an ADU to support her father aging in place as her family moved into the main home, or the Martinez family, who is working with their son to build a 2-bedroom ADU that will house him and his daughter, who are currently doubled up in an Athmar Park home. It's the positive outcomes that support why Blueprint Denver calls for allowing ADUs in all neighborhoods citywide, and why all of the adopted neighborhood planning initiative area plans reinforce this policy. Over the last several years, city council members and individual homeowners have proposed rezonings to allow ADUs. Approximately 30 to 50% of the rezoning applications that we process in recent years were for individual ADU rezonings. City council approves these rezonings, recognizing that they're consistent with adopted city policy. However, rezoning to allow ADUs is time-consuming and expensive. Since 2018, the city has issued a little over 400 permits for new ADUs. To help put that number into perspective, there are approximately 345,000 housing units in the city. So the number of ADUs is less than 1% of the total number of units in the city. And other cities comparable to Denver, like Portland and Seattle, have seen larger numbers of ADUs constructed after zoning reforms, but ADUs are still only a small fraction of the total number of housing units. A new ADU state law was signed by Governor Polis in May of this year, and key elements of this law include requiring ADUs where single unit homes are allowed, removing restrictive design standards for ADUs, and limitations on owner occupancy requirements. Additionally, once the law takes effect on June 30th of next year, HOAs can no longer prohibit ADUs. Now let's review the current ADU standards. There are rules for ADUs that will still apply. The ADUs in Denver project that was adopted last year looked at how ADUs fit in with different neighborhoods and how updates to the zoning code could reduce barriers to creating ADUs. There was a robust community conversation, which led to the creation of design standards based on neighborhood context. The Citywide ADUs project does not propose to change any of these design standards. The ADU design standards vary by neighborhood context, where greater allowances are in the urban neighborhoods, and the standards increase in urban edge zone districts and again in suburban zone districts. Suburban districts have the largest setback requirements. This slide illustrates the design standards for detached ADUs in urban neighborhoods on the left and urban edge and suburban on the right. Please note that the rear setbacks are greater in the suburban context. The next slide focuses more on the bulk plane requirement to give everyone a better sense of how that works, which you can also see on these slides as well. So this slide illustrates how the bulk plane requirement works. The goal of the standard is to reduce the allowed ADU height near neighbors. The image on the left shows the bulk plane standard in blue, and the image on the right shows how the massing of the ADU would be reduced to meet the standard. All right, let's turn to the Citywide ADUs project. This project consists of two main actions. First, a text amendment to the zoning code to allow ADUs in all zone districts that allow residential. And second, a map amendment to rezone the obsolete 1 ADUs districts, which I'll explain a little bit more further. Here's a map of the city that shows the zone districts that allow ADUs in green and where the Citywide ADUs project is proposing to allow ADUs in orange. Each color represents slightly over a third of the city's land area. The proposed change to allow ADUs in all residential areas of the city would allow 16 districts within the Denver zoning code to be deleted since they exist only to allow ADUs. These zone districts that end in the number 1, are identical to their non-1 counterparts, with the only difference being the allowance of ADUs. The 1 districts are no longer needed, and their removal can help simplify the Denver zoning code. This text amendment will be accompanied by a map amendment that would rezone these properties from the 1 districts to their most directly corresponding zone district. For example, USUA1 would be rezoned to USUA, etc. The proposed map amendment would not change any zoning requirements that apply to the rezoned properties. The new ADU law restricts when a city can enforce the owner occupancy requirement, and it's only at the time of permit. The proposed text amendment adjusts Denver's rules to comply with the state law. This update would still allow an ADU to be used even if the owner moved off the property. So before we conclude the presentation portion of tonight's meeting, here's another look at the map that shows where ADUs are allowed today and proposed to be allowed. All right, as for the next steps of this project, we will have another virtual town hall like this one on August 21st. So you're welcome to come back for another round. And then we hope to be starting the public adoption process with our first step, public hearing at the planning board on September 4th. Our goal is to be at City Council public adoption hearing in November. And we encourage everyone to visit our website for the most current information on the projects and the next steps, to read our public review draft of the text amendment, and to send us questions and comments. And with that, we will go to the Q&A portion. Do we have a question?
Yeah, let's start out with Mickey in the Q&A asked why was the process of letting each neighborhood vote for or against ADUs to a blanket enablement that overrides community preferences? He says it's a loss of freedom. So I think, just to paraphrase that, right now, in some cases, individual city council members have proposed rezonings when they felt there was a high level of neighborhood support to allow ADUs, and that's been happening over the last several years. That's culminated in this current proposal to allow ADUs citywide. And the question, I think, is, why make that jump? And perhaps one of the city council sponsors would be interested in starting.
Sure, I can take a stab at that. So, Mickey, thanks for the question. I have two answers immediately, and the first is you're talking about freedom of choice. We want to empower each homeowner the freedom to choose whether they want an auxiliary dwelling unit or not. And so I agree with you. I think that freedom of choice is important. And right now, there's the way the regulation works is we've heard several times from residents that they don't agree with this regulation, that some areas allow ADUs, some areas don't. And sometimes the ADU law is so specific, that there might be a home, excuse me, there might be a home on a block that allows for an ADU right next to two homes that don't. And I would say that's textbook bureaucracy, that we have regulations that are so opaque and difficult to understand that that it could be that specific. And so we want to cut through bureaucracy and make our city more transparent. And one way to do that is to make sure that the entire city has access to ADUs. I would also say that just other cities have also permitted ADUs for quite some time. And as we look at other cities, just because a city provides the ability to create ADUs citywide, that doesn't lead to a huge rush of auxiliary dwelling units being built in that city. So as we've done research of other peer cities, the data just doesn't show that everyone's going to go out and build an ADU tomorrow because we pass citywide ADUs today. Councilmember Parity?
Yeah, and I'm going off video because I'm worried my internet connection isn't great. If I'm garbled, please tell me and I'll give up. But what I wanted to add to that is basically that we've gone through the same process for this bill that would authorize ADUs in the remaining residential single-family areas of the city. This is the same process that council members have gone through with respect to each individual neighborhood that was rezoned for ADUs. And so in terms of the public being able to have input, and I mean, that's kind of what we're doing here tonight. We sent out a postcard mailing that may be what brought many of you here. So we are going through the same process, although it's a larger chunk of the city at the same time.
Great, thank you. Abe, do we have another question?
Yeah, let's so one question that we just you know, Justin, because you get all of the comments and questions that are submitted through our website, but get a lot of questions about homeowners associations. And so the basic question being, does this mean my HOA has to allow ADUs? Do you wanna take that on?
Yeah, I can answer that. The simple answer is no. The city doesn't regulate HOAs, so they're allowed to have their own rules. The zoning amendment does not apply to HOA rules. However, as we brought up in the presentation, the state does regulate HOAs, and the recent HOA law says that HOAs must allow ADUs by June 30th of next year.
Thanks, Justin. And let's see. Well, as everybody that knows me knows, I love bulk planes. And so I'm going to elevate Catherine Fontaine's question. Thank you, Catherine. This is kind of a technical question. She asks, why change the current bulk plane? Can't we simply allow them within the current massing? So actually, just to clarify, Catherine, this proposal to extend ADU allowances citywide would not change the bulk planes. We actually developed through a project, that took a lot of neighborhood conversation over about a year and a half, and concluded in 2023. We updated all of the rules about how ADUs can be built as Justin described, and the rules vary depending on which part of the city that you're in, and the bulk plane has some variations, and all of that would remain intact. So all those rules stay the same. And let's see, should we go on to, so another question was, in my observation, when there is a zoning change, existing buildings get scraped and the property is redeveloped to the maximum allowable footprint and massing, for example, slot homes. How will this be prevented? And so, yeah, that's a great question, and something that we're always thinking about. I think that this is something where we rely a lot on our peer cities and what we hear from other cities that have actually made similar changes in the past. For example, Portland actually allowed ADUs citywide more than 10 years ago now. And so talking to them, actually the experience that Portland and other cities are having with ADUs is that they're really something that existing homeowners add. It's not typically a great investment proposition to just buy a house and build an ADU and then try to, you know, sell that for a profit. So typically they're pretty much happening because long term somebody is thinking about housing a family member, or they just, you know, have an idea about, you know, how they'll have a rental that will help them earn extra income on their property. And so we don't really see it resulting in scraping of the primary houses or resulting in like big changes on individual properties. But thanks for that question.
One addition to that, you mentioned slat homes as an example. My predecessor, Wayne New, actually got rid of slat homes because of how much of a hindrance slat homes are to our community. So so how will it be prevented, specifically slat homes, which isn't exactly your question, but you do mention it. We've now prevented slat homes entirely in the city of Denver.
All right, so just looking at the questions, can you clarify if neighborhoods with a historic overlay like 7th Avenue will be eligible for ADUs? And so that historic districts or landmark districts have additional rules about demolition of existing structures. And then when building new structures or additions, there's a design review process that the Landmark Preservation Commission participates in. And all of that would apply to ADUs. But basically the answer is yes. So if you can build residential, this proposal would allow you to build an ADU. So that includes all of our residential historic districts like 7th Avenue. And then Councilman Hines, I just noticed you said you'd like to answer that question. So let me let you in, sorry.
Oh, no, I was trying to time we'd like to answer the question live with your answer to the question. So apologies, I was doing some Zoom technical stuff as opposed to actually wanting to answer the question. So yes to the answer. Technically, ADUs are allowed in 7th Avenue Historic District, but all the historic preservation requirements apply. So there were extra hoops to jump through if you want to put an ADU into a historic district like 7th Avenue. Is that right, Abe?
That is right.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. And while you've got the mic, Councilman Hines, you may also want to help with this question from Danny. I'll probably get a mangle your last name, Danny. I'm sorry, Slaybaugh, perhaps. And the question is, can you help us understand the benefits of blanket ADU zoning? What is the current cost and rezoning time involved? Involved in an ADU rezoning? What percentage of ADU rezoning applications have been denied in the past? So part of that is technical, and staff can jump in, but do you want to start?
Sure, I'll take a stab at this. So the benefits of ADU, blanket ADU rezoning, one is, it's textbook bureaucracy when our zoning code is very complicated and complex. And if you have to somehow dive into the details of the zoning code to know whether or not your particular house can or cannot build an ADU, that's difficult, and that makes ADUs more difficult to build. Another is it's a matter of equity. The people who are building ADUs now more than likely are people who have the time and the resources to learn about the zoning code or hire someone, an external advocate on your behalf that would then know the zoning code. And so mean, ADUs aren't cheap. They're still, you know, a couple few $100,000. So, so even just unlocking, you know, building the ADU is expensive, but also knowing whether you can unlock the ability to ADUs has been a barrier. And so we have seen that the people who are building ADUs right now are disproportionately people with more time and interest and affluence. And so this is, I think, an equity question to make sure that if someone is in a situation where they need to build something for their loved one, they can do that and not have to delve into the zoning code. Councilmember Watson.
And Councilmember Hines, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for asking that question, Danny. And I'll add two other points onto that. First, your last part of your question, how many have been denied in the past? 0. Actually, there was one, but it was on a technicality for why the one was denied. And that's of, I won't quote from community planning and development. They can say how many ADU requests have come through, but over the years, it's been just that one on a technicality. The second part of your question is why citywide makes sense. And Councilmember Hines made some excellent points. For me, as a community member that was very involved within District 9 neighborhoods, one of the things that I always drove me nuts is I would sit in the planning process for any plan that came through the Whittier neighborhood or Five Points neighborhood, or any of the communities around me, and I would participate greatly. And it always drove me bonkers that we would do these 2-year processes, whether it's a neighborhood plan or a direct plan for a community, and then we didn't implement it. We will get input like for Blueprint Denver, in which I participated in, and Blueprint Denver recommends ADUs across the city. Every neighborhood plan that has been passed since Blueprint Denver, which is the citywide land use plan, every other plan that's been passed has also asked for implementing ADUs, but still we haven't acted on it as a city over all of these years. And as I stated, every ADU request that goes through that very long and expensive process that Councilmember Hines described is approved. But if we implemented it across the city, it will remove the timing, the amount of time and stress to folks who don't have architects to help them walk through this process. And it will also demonstrate that we're listening to community members who have said time and time again in their city, their neighborhood plans that they want ADUs. So those are some of the reasons why I'm sponsoring this legislation.
And I'm sorry, I'm going to come back into the conversation. Thank you, Councilmember Watson, for answering parts of the question that I didn't, I skipped over. That one technicality was in my district, and it was over, in my first term. And it turns out that that applicant didn't need to go through rezoning at all to do what they were intending to do. And so it was a recommendation from CPD to vote against that rezoning. But that determination came so close to the city council vote that it was already on the agenda. So we couldn't not vote because it was on the agenda. But the recommendation was to vote no, because it turns out the applicant didn't need a rezoning at all. So that's the technicality. And that's the only reason why we've voted no on any ADU rezoning in the last 5 years.
Great, thanks. See, we had a question from Ashley that I think it maybe is, Ashley, apologies that you may not have gotten your full answer in the Q&A. You were asking, what are the mayor's intentions for subsidizing construction for low-income ADUs on private property, thereby shifting some responsibility for low-income housing over onto private property? And Councilwoman Parody had said, we can't speak specifically for the mayor. I'll just mention that we actually, the city does help fund a Denver Housing Authority program, which is the Single Family Plus program, which has been very successful over the last few years, operating primarily in West Denver, but they're now expanding citywide, programs to allow property owners to build ADUs to get support, low interest loans or other support to build ADUs that will be deed restricted as affordable at certain income levels, or to help support low income residents to get housing in an ADU. And so we're going to continue that. Also, the state law that Justin talked about that's been passed. So one of the great things is that the state has actually set aside initially several $1 million to help provide grant programs to communities that allow ADUs, and will ultimately hopefully be eligible for that grant program by allowing ADUs citywide. And then we can apply for grants that would help lower income residents either build ADUs or get into ADUs at subsidized rental rates using the grant money. It could also help us reduce permitting times by increasing staffing. It can help us reduce permitting fees. And so there are a lot of great options in terms of helping to make ADUs more affordable to the people that really need them. And council members may want to jump in on that as well.
Yeah, Abe, I think you hit all of the points. You hit the new state law. You hit the current DHA funds that are available. So from my perspective, there really wasn't an additional piece to add.
Great. And so Gertie asks, here's a technical question. What will the impact for a zone lot that is smaller than the current designation be? For example, a zone lot that is designated B but doesn't meet the square footage requirement. So basically, up until the project that Justin described that updated all of our ADU rules last year, we had rules that said you had to have a certain lot size in order to build an ADU at all. And so sometimes what, council members would sponsor a rezoning for a neighborhood to allow ADUs, but people that were in that neighborhood still couldn't build them if they didn't have a certain lot size. One of the things we changed was remove that minimum lot size so that if you have the ability to build an ADU, you could potentially build it on any lot. And so that would stay the same with this proposal. There wouldn't be any specific lot size that would be required to build an ADU.
Abe, we had a few questions on short-term rentals. I'm wondering if you can speak to that to help clarify, because that can be a confusing topic.
Yes, and do you want to paraphrase one of the questions, or do you want, I can just extemporize about short-term rentals if you'd like?
Yeah, if you can just explain the rules as they stand with short-term rentals.
Right. So the short-term rental rules would not be affected by this proposal. So all the rules for short-term rentals stay the same. And so right now you are allowed to conduct a short-term rental in an accessory dwelling unit or in your house if you live there. So you have to be the resident in order to obtain a license. You can't just buy up a bunch of houses and use them for short-term rentals. And the same is true for accessory dwelling units. And that will remain the same. And so here's a related question that just came in from Gary, or it might be related. So will the owner be required to live on the property? If so, are you considering waiving this requirement? So this is something that this amendment would propose to change. And so right now, the current rules for accessory dwelling units in single unit zone districts say that the owner of the property has to live on the property for there to be an ADU. And so, there's some tricky things with that, because it means that if you build an ADU and you move across the street to live with your partner, or whatever life changes happen, and you keep your property, the ADU becomes illegal as soon as you're not living there anymore. So the state has actually addressed this in their statewide laws about ADUs and said you can require owners to live there, but only to build the ADU, to get the permit in the first place. You can't say that they just have to live there forever in order to maintain the ADU. And so this proposal would change our rules to align with the new state law and say, yes, you actually have to live there if you're in a single unit zone district to get the permit. You're not just an out-of-town investor or something like that. But if your circumstances change later, it is in fact okay for you to move out of the property once the ADU is permitted. All right, we have a good question from Seth Ford. I'm one of those homeowners who want the freedom to build an ADU. Why didn't we do this sooner? Anyone want to say why we haven't done it sooner?
I would say,
I've only been here a year, so.
yeah, that was going to be
Gotta
my
get it.
answer. I said we weren't in council at that time, but yes, thank you for bringing that forward.
So, I've got a question. Justin, you haven't answered anything recently, so I'll give you the first crack at it. Does CPD have planners that speak Spanish? And what if people want to apply for an auxiliary dwelling unit and their mother tongue is Spanish?
Thank you, Councilman. Yes, we do. We have bilingual planners and members of staff, and we'd be able to help translate the materials and help them guide them along the way for the application process.
Awesome, thank you.
Abe, I'm going to pitch this to you because it's a sort of a clarifying question about owner occupancy. Do the state laws speak to how long you have to live at the property, or is it just the time of getting the permit?
The state law is quite general, and this is true of most of these kinds of state laws, because they're basically saying in general what's allowed as a rule for like all cities in Colorado. And we can still craft our own rule, but what the state law says is you're allowed to say that the owner has to live there to get a permit, but not at any other time. And so what we've crafted, the language that we've crafted, has said that you in fact are required to be living on the property that you own when you submit the permit application, and that's all it says. So there's no specific amount of time after that that would have to elapse before you could leave. So once you've got the permission to build the ADU, you're good.
Thanks, Abe. Oh, I have another technical question for either Abe or Justin. How are ADUs considered as part of lot coverage? For example, garages, I believe, are only counted at 50%. Will this apply to ADUs as well?
Yes, it already does. And that was one of the things that we did last year in updating all of the rules. So right now, you get a partial exception at least for the amount of lot that you're allowed to cover with an ADU. There is a separate zoning amendment underway right now that's proposed. That's the 2024 bundle of text amendments. You can see that on our zoning code website, that actually proposes to simplify all of our lot coverage rules. to basically just have one single lot coverage that and everything would count towards it, including garages and ADUs. That's a separate proposal though. And that might relate a little bit to a question about would restrictions slash guidelines on ADU architecture slash style be provided? For example, I live in Congress Park where I'm in favor of ADUs, but with a restriction so that the neighborhood can preserve the style. And I think the answer might depend a little bit about what's meant on architecture or style. So like the plain meaning of architecture, like architectural style would be like Victorian or craftsman. And we don't actually have those restrictions. We don't have a review process that would say it has to be one of those particular styles. We do have rules like the bulk planes and the lot coverage rule that we were just asking about, like how much of the lot are you allowed to cover with buildings? And all of that will continue to apply. The state law, interestingly, says that you're not allowed to have restrictions that cross into the realm of like architectural quality. And basically the reason that they did that is because of worry about communities allowing ADUs, but then having so many restrictions on them that make it so that they're actually impossible to build. But you know, one thing I would note is that I know I don't know if the person that asked the question is involved in this, but the Congress Park Neighborhood Association has actually been thinking about conservation overlay zone district for at least parts of Congress Park, and that's a tool that can be used to adjust zoning regulations to be more sensitive to existing characteristics in certain neighborhoods. And so that's something that could potentially apply to any new construction in Congress Park, including ADUs, if that conversation continued forward. And that's true in other neighborhoods as well.
Abe, one comment about Congress Park and the conservation overlay that you're talking about. I had some extra money at the end of last year's budget, and so I sent a call out to members and organizations in District 10. Congress Park neighbors did express interest in that community benefit fund, and so we did provide some funds to Congress Park neighbors to hire someone to help Congress Park go through that conservation overlay process. So if that is of interest to you, please do reach out to the board of Congress Park neighbors, and I'm sure they would love to have additional support from the community with regards to the conservation overlay. So thank you.
I have something I want to talk about that kind of gets to several questions in the chat, and these are really fair questions. People are asking, essentially, is this going to incentivize more like investor-owned, you know, snapping up of housing in our city, which is a massive, massive problem. And not to divert us too much, but I was a legal aid attorney during the foreclosure crisis, and that was when housing started to become a commodity in the city and get bought up in that way, and I'm deeply concerned about it. My take on ADUs is that right now, a lot of homes that go up for sale, and I've seen this on my block, smaller houses will be scraped, and what you will end up with is one gigantic lot filling unit. And so if we're going to have a scrape, which I think we all agree is not ideal, and there's a lot of things we need to be doing about that, I would prefer that it be a scrape that ends up with 2 units than 1, as far as my block goes, because then you have more likelihood of those 2 units being more affordable, of having, you know, families in them and that kind of thing. I live in a duplex, which now I couldn't build in my neighborhood because my neighborhood is now only single family. It got downzoned. So, you know, the issue with investors buying up property in the city is really, really, really complicated. One solution to that over time, I think, is for the city to own and acquire more housing ourselves so that we're competing in that housing market and keeping housing affordable by owning it. We, as Denver, managed to achieve a legislative change in the last legislative session that opens the path for us to do more of that. We also are hopefully, I believe, sending a sales tax measure to the ballot to try to fund the city doing more preservation, more creation of units, and basically try to get us helping to cool that market down. There are a lot of other angles to that, and I will tell you that like nothing occupies me as much as trying to get housing to be a place where people can live and can afford in the city. And I certainly don't think that, you know, this little bill is not a panacea for that. But it is on the whole better for affordability if you end up with 2 units rather than 1, and more likely to avoid the scrape if you can build an additional unit rather than, you know, having to scrape what's there to gain that profit, right? So if you build it, people who are already occupying a home, instead of potentially selling it, hopefully will now consider building an additional unit. So imperfect, not a solution to scrapes. I also don't think we've seen, because of the owner occupancy requirements, we haven't really seen scrapes with ADUs. That hasn't happened so far, and that remains in place.
Thank you. And so there's some questions about parking. And the first thing I'd say is that we don't have parking requirements for single unit houses in Denver or for accessory uses that are already allowed for single unit houses, including ADUs where they're already allowed. And so there wouldn't be parking requirements specifically proposed with ADUs, and the state law has some things to say about that as well. We haven't specifically heard concerns that I'm aware of in the places that already allow ADUs with parking issues associated with that, but definitely recognize concerns with parking in general in Denver. There certainly are some neighborhoods where it's been challenging for some time now to park on the street. We have a question about how adjacent neighbors will be protected. Can ADUs be built with windows overlooking neighbors' backyards? This was a big part of the discussion that we had leading up to the ADU changes that we made last year, how to protect the privacy of neighbors. And so there aren't rules specifically about where you can have a window or which direction a window can look. And one of the reasons for that is that it's very challenging to administer rules like that when you have so many different kinds of lots in the city and different kinds of situations. But there are some more general review rules that are oriented towards privacy, which include for a detached ADU, which is, you know, mostly what we're talking about, that they have to be in the rear third of the lot, which is means that they wouldn't specifically be overlooking the neighbor's primary residence or maybe even the main part of their backyard. We also actually made a change previously. Second story decks were not allowed at all on structures that were in the rear portion of the yard, but actually made an allowance for decks on ADUs when they're right on the alley. So a deck that's overlooking the alley, which is, you know, all just part of taking advantage of the fact that in some situations you actually could provide some privacy and outdoor space for ADU residents without having much impact at all on the neighbor's privacy.
I have a question I'd like to go ahead and answer live, which is about, it talks about the concern about short-term rentals. And I just want to let people know that we actually also have a primary residence requirement for short-term rentals as well. So people can rent out if you're traveling, you can rent out your home, you can rent out a room in your home, you can rent out an accessory dwelling unit if you're living in your home, but you can't just purchase properties and rent them out as short-term rentals on Airbnb in Denver. So that is existing regulation.
Great. And so Michael asked a question about licensed general contractors still being required to plan and build an ADU. any allowances for a manufactured structure or one made by, I don't even know what SIP panels are, but that's a technical thing. If they complete all the testing requirements required to get a permit and still do the work themselves. So we require a contractor licensing for major renovation and new construction in the city, and that applies to accessory dwelling units as well. Basically, there's no specific prohibition on using manufactured or factory built structures for ADUs or for primary residences for that matter, if they can meet the Denver building code and our zoning regulations, and some certainly can.
And Abe, I have a question here that I think will be helpful for either you or Justin to touch. One of the attendees asked, if the orange zones get approved for ADUs, how will the homeowner application process change, if at all? I see what's described online, but any other background color that you or Justin can provide would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah. So the big thing is that, we talked about how if you're in those areas now where you're not allowed to build an ADU, you can apply for a rezoning, and it's a lengthy and fairly expensive process. And those have all but one have been approved by city council in the end. So what changes really is that you would no longer have to do that. You could simply submit online a zoning permit application proposing to build an ADU on your property, and it will go through a review to make sure it meets all of the zoning rules and all of the building code rules. Anything you'd add, Justin, or anyone?
No, I think you covered it. Thanks, Abe.
Jenna, do you see anything else interesting in there we should make sure to get to? I'm trying to catch up on the technical questions.
CPD folks, there's the top question in the queue. So the person that's been waiting the longest was asking about if we were only authorizing ADUs attached to a single family home versus tandem home. And I think that is the case, right? But you guys know better than I.
Right. So the basic answer is no rules changing around tandem houses at all. So I think the person who lives in College View has a kind of unusual zone district that allows single family houses, ADUs, and tandem houses. It's kind of special for the College View neighborhood where there are like really deep lots. So none of that would change there.
We have a question. Would income being generated from ADUs by homeowners be taxed and or required to pay any fees attached to owning the ADUs?
So let's see. There are permit fees to get an ADU permitted to begin with. There are property taxes that are based on property value assessments that would likely eventually catch up to the fact that you'd made a major improvement on your property. So it's really the same as if you, let's say you popped the top of your house and built a nice master bedroom and bathroom up there, which I wish I had. Eventually your property taxes are likely to go up based on the valuation of your property. And the same is true about adding an ADU. But there isn't some special ongoing ADU fee. And there was a part of that question that I missed, I think, Jenna. Do you remember which one it was?
Sorry, let me pull it up. Would income be being generated from ADUs by homeowners be taxed?
Well, it's income on your income tax forms, but that's all. Basically, it's not, there's nothing special about earning money from ADUs.
I see a question in Q&A from Sean Emery, and the question is about a neighbor who has never lived in their home and submitted an ADU permit and was approved. I hope, Sean, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to kind of massage your question a little bit, because the question is, what's the proof provided that the owner actually lives in the property? I'm not sure we would talk specifically. We don't have the ability to specifically talk about a particular rezoning, and I'm not sure we'd want to talk about an application itself. But so I hope you don't mind that I'm massaging the question a little bit. What if a neighbor or someone believes that their neighbor is improperly using an ADU permit? Is there a process that do they call 311, or what can someone do if they believe that that someone else is improperly applying for an ADU permit?
Yes, they can call 311, and our neighborhood inspection services will follow up on that. As far as what was provided originally when they applied for that permit, they would have had to certify that they lived on the property. So if they don't actually live there, they weren't providing an accurate application. And just note that the rule about the owner living on the property is just in single unit districts, so that if you're in a zone district that's not single unit, like it's 2 unit or above, that rule doesn't exist, and they would potentially be in good standing.
We have a question in here. So how soon will we be able to apply to build an ADU? Is there a preliminary process one can start to be ready once it's passed?
Yeah, good question. So we're currently tracking towards potential city council adoption in November. That's right, Justin, right? Hopefully. And basically within a few days of the passage, if city council were to adopt this proposal, it becomes law in the zoning code, and a permit could technically be approved under the new rules. And so what that means is actually you could actually submit the permit application now. It's probably just a little early at this point, and request that it be reviewed under the pending rules, but it couldn't actually be approved until the rules were changed.
Sorry. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I was going to say, while I feel pretty confident that it will pass, we do not know for sure that it will pass it on any particular date. So that's another CPD, rightfully so, enforces what is current law and not what is anticipated future law. So there's, I believe it'll pass. I believe it'll pass in November, but we don't know that for sure. It depends on the majority of council.
Yes, we are a 13-member body. And I was going to say, in answer to Rick's question, I know Abe spoke a little bit about parking earlier, but the end of this, which is, are all city council members in favor? We never know for sure until everybody votes, right? And people are thinking about their votes until they vote. But we have spent a huge amount of time talking to our colleagues, and especially in light of the fact that we've now been directed to do this by state law. I am quite certain that we have, a majority, a super majority, conceivably unanimous council. We'll see when it goes, but I think we're confident in passage, as Councilman Hines said.
Awesome. And so Janelle asks about the affordability fee. So as of a few years ago, we have a citywide affordable housing system that charges fees or makes literal on-site affordable housing requirements for larger developments, at least. And it's so if you were making an improvement to a single family or single unit property now, the fee is based on the square footage. And yes, as of now, basically any square footage that you added would be subject to that fee, it would tend not to be very much for something that was small like an ADU. I think that's something that we should continue to have a conversation about, though.
On the property tax question, we've seen a few variants of this. I wouldn't be able to speak to that because I don't have firmly enough in my head the property tax valuation. I don't know if anyone feels like they could back of the envelope that, but that might be a little hard for us on this Zoom. Because it depends, you know, the value of your property. There's so many factors that go into that. It's hard for me to say how much the tax valuation would increase because of an ADU, and it's always going to depend on like overall market conditions in that particular year. So anyone has a better back of the envelope than me, go for it.
And the question Councilmember Parity is answering is, what's a ballpark average property
Right.
tax increase when ADUs are added? Just not if someone looks at or comes and watches the video recording, they may not see the Q&A.
It was more like the question I was not answering, and I apologize for that. I think there's just a lot of variables in how much it increases the value of your property.
Yeah, and that's a great question for if you go to www.denvergov.org/citywide ADUs, that's the webpage for this project. There's a form on there where you can submit comments and questions. That's a great question for that, because that'll require us to get with our property tax assessment people, but we can definitely tell you what they would say when they're going to say there are a lot of variables, but maybe they'll hazard a guess.
Thank you, everyone who's submitted questions so far. Looks like we've gone more than 70 questions have been asked in the Q&A. So thank you so much for that. We're starting to get towards the end of the questions that have been presented so far. So if you have another question, please feel free to ask that question. We're scheduled to be here for another more than 20 minutes, but if you feel like we've answered every question that you've had, that's fine too. We don't have to be here until 7:30 if you feel like you've asked everything you need, and certainly we can, just because you have had the opportunity to ask questions here doesn't mean that we'll put up next steps and slide here in a little bit, and this will give you ways for other opportunities to ask questions or get things answered. Looks like we do have one other question.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to Councilman Parity answered the question about this particular situation. Let's say you had a property that you were going to build a house on, and you also wanted to build an ADU. You can't be living there because there's nowhere to live, right? So would you have to build the house and then move in and then get the ADU permit is, I think, the question. And this is something that the state ADU law specifically addresses, and since our proposal would bring us in line with the state requirements, there's specifically an exception for that says basically if you're concurrently building a new house and an ADU, then you don't have to live there, addressing the fact that you couldn't live there, really. And good question on the corner lot. That's another thing we talked about a lot when we updated the ADU rules last year. There actually were pretty significant setbacks required when you were building an ADU around the corner, basically, which didn't really make sense because, well, in many cases, it could actually be helpful for an ADU that was, facing the side street, a different direction from the house on a corner lot, to actually be kind of oriented just like a house would be, like a little house with a front yard. And so that is allowed. One of the specific homeowner stories I remember hearing from that project we did last year was from a woman who lives in Green Valley Ranch and actually doesn't have the ability to build an ADU now, but would if this proposal was approved, and has a really big corner lot, and then on the side street has just like this really long fence, and then her neighbor has a really long fence, and when you walk along the sidewalk there's like nothing to see. And she was really, excited by the potential to build an ADU there so that there could actually be a front porch and some activity on that side street where there isn't any now.
There's a question about providing trees to homeowners, and I know Justin's typing the answer. I want to highlight this. If you want a tree, go to beasmartash.org, and Denver has trees available. So, and I believe they're at no cost. That is because of the emerald ash borer that has been destroying some of Denver's trees, and we want to make sure that we provide trees that are resistant to the ash borer. And so anyway, sorry, Justin, that you were typing it in, but boy, we sure could use some additional urban canopy. So if you want a tree, please help us get you a tree.
Yeah, Abe, I'm not going to try to answer Catherine's question as well. And she's asking, can we allow ADUs without increasing the current allowable accessory structure height? Current proposal will allow 1.5-story ADUs that dwarf the abutting homes.
Right, where this proposal wouldn't change any of the rules for accessory dwelling units. And right now, the rules for detached accessory dwelling units would have a maximum height of 24 feet, or you can build 2 stories there. On most single unit lots, the maximum height for the primary structure for the house basically is either 30 or 35 feet. So it is a fair bit lower than what you're allowed to build with the house. But the proposal is basically just to keep those same rules.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for attending. It is amazing that I think we ultimately had 126 people sign up. There were some people who signed up after the webinar started. So I'm pretty excited about the amount of interest in this process. Justin, you want to talk about what the next steps will be?
Yes, and before we get into the next steps, Abe, would you like to provide a short summary of what we've heard?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, yeah, thanks. I just echo the appreciation for all the great questions and participation. Definitely heard some concerns about, ADUs being a new thing in some neighborhoods, and a little bit of trepidation about what it could mean for privacy and parking. And hopefully we've, at least started to answer some of the questions with that, but, also heard basically, some comments like, we should have done this a long time ago, and just kind of expressing the sentiment that we really have a great housing need, and this is a way to allow housing that, people often use the term gentle. Basically, this is not, large new apartment buildings or even row houses or duplexes. It's, a way in which we can add housing into neighborhoods that already are walkable and have services in a way that oftentimes you just wouldn't even notice. I haven't noticed when my neighbors have added ADUs necessarily. And so we've heard that too, and just really appreciate all of that feedback. And it just really helps us moving forward. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Abe. So yeah, just to reiterate the next steps of our process, on August 21st, we'll be having another virtual town hall like this one. So if you'd like to come back, please do. And then we will be getting into the public adoption process in early September. And we really invite everyone to go to our project website for the most current information and to review the public draft and to provide more comments and questions via our web form. And thank you everybody for your time tonight. Are there any closing
Thanks.
remarks?
I don't have closing remarks. I was just saying thanks.
Same here. Thank you all. It was great attendance, and thank you, CPD, for kind of your assistance in answering some of those really tough questions as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye.